Секунду. Добрый день.
Hello, dear colleagues and participants of our conference today. Online, we have more than 100 participants and more than 500 people have visited our page and representatives of more than 28 countries. I feel a little bit like a blogger myself. I would like, of course, to ask you, how is your health? Is everything okay? We all understand that the question of health has transferred from the category of just saying hi to the question of how well do we feel. And this is one of the changes that we all face today. It is very obvious that globally much has changed. The expert society is feeling this, and our attitude towards such values as nature, people, and economic development has changed. We are going to talk about the natural capital and sustainable markets, new single and sustainable approach. We will talk about the natural capital as an ecosystem, about the resources, how we can invest in them in order to use them further. When we talk about sustainable markets, we talk about sustainable development and the reform of corporate management. We talk about nature positive economy. We can translate it as economy that needs a vaccine from ecology. When we talk about the integrated approach, we will talk about the regulation of the social relationship in order to take the interest of all stakeholders. You know that the business society, especially the Global Economic Formal BCSD, consider creation of a pleasant society and future for everybody using the power of nature and resources of a private business, and with its ability to integrate the innovations. The latter beneficiary of all this is population, of course, and improvement of the lifestyle. In general, our event is aimed at finding new decisions on ecosystems, on management, and also bring support for the further development. With this, at our diagram, you can see we have a very powerful content of experts. The expert society from different fields, and it can be a key resource, a key support to save the natural capital and to create sustainable markets. The sessions today have been built so that we could see the local trends, to hear the opinion of the international experts on the topic suggested, and to see how all this is implemented and can be implemented on specific examples, specific practical examples. So we would like you not to lose your senses when transferring from one level to another. We know that sustainability of business in long term is very much dependable on the nature capital, and this is obvious and even critical for the mining companies. In Kazakhstan, we understand that business is the leading power and the resource for changes. Lately, we have been connecting sustainable development with implementation of sustainable goals. How we can see the situation nowadays, Galina Artyukhina will tell us, the organizer of this event. Galina, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for the floor given. I'm very happy to greet all the participants of today's event. And I want to tell you how the tendencies have changed in interaction of business with shareholders on the example of our association. Can we please put on presentation? Thank you very much. Kazakhstani Business Council for Sustainable Development received its status in March 2003, and it happened so that these days our association is celebrating its 18th birthday. If we take the human life, we are already grown up, and these years can reflect on how the understanding of business has changed throughout these years, especially in interaction with stakeholders. In 2003, 20 major industrial companies, extraction, chemical, mining sector companies have come together in order to define their strategies in the context of challenges of the time. So first 10 years, the work of association was aimed on interaction with stakeholders. Most of them were the state agencies, because big work has been done on implementation of the requirements of Kyoto Protocol. Association has organized and conducted the first Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility Forum, started to bring in the standards of GRI, and we came to the reports of sustainability, reports on sustainability. Starting 2013, we work a lot on implementation on the green growth, green economy development in the Republic of Kazakhstan. In 2016, we have conducted first rating of reports on sustainability to see how companies, extracting companies, reveal their non-financial reporting for all the stakeholders. And we saw that we have very uneven level of information. And starting 2017, we have been actively partnering the reporting exchange platform. That's the International Sustainability Business Society. And this platform gathers more than 2,000 requirements for non-financial business reporting, which help business to make a connection between this reporting and sustainable development. And our association twice has submitted national information sheet on how in Kazakhstan the volunteer and obligatory requirements for reporting are submitted. This huge work allows us to interact with stakeholders and extend the circle of stakeholders depending on the aim standing for the business. If we look right now on the general report of the Kazakhstani companies, we can see some general trends and directions. Very big attention is brought to social projects. We can see that each company brings some contribution to the development of the region of their business. They interact very well with the local state agencies, and we know the practice of yearly concluded memorandums, in the framework of which the business implements huge social projects in the region of their location. When we talk about, of course, safety of the personal development of the local personal development of the local business and procurement, businesses can implement different projects on different scales, depending on what is the region and what is the scale of the company. But all of them have reports on control and monitoring of emissions, the other ecological events and monitoring and fulfillment of separate biological species. This again comes to the tasks that are put forward for them by the legislation. But in this part we can see big potential for development of interaction with stakeholders, because we think that today this moment is underestimated by Kazakhstani business. Not only risks, but also big opportunities are brought. The example of which can be taken very scale work that is done by the Ministry of Ecology and Geology and the Natural Development. New eco code has been discussed for some time now. Very broad society has been brought into this work, and today this platform, we think, should be considered by business, should be used by business more for the implementation of their tasks. So the mission, our mission as an association, is to be a platform of extending the partnership in the interests of sustainable development and stimulate, support effective partnership between the state agencies, state and private sectors, and between organizations of civil society. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Galina. I think that we will answer the questions a little bit later. Now we have the issues of implementing ecosystems in the state management of the Republic of Kazakhstan. We understand that all the declared aims of the sustainable development and the state programs of the Republic of Kazakhstan that have very much a social direction now. A lot is talking about the safety and protection of ecological systems. So our event is conducted with the help of the Ministry of Ecology. We have today Ayjan Iskakova, the member of the Committee on Ecology and Nature Resources Use, Majlis of Parliament of the Republic of Kazakhstan. She's a very young, specialist. She's a professional ecologist. She has some works in the field of ecology. I would like to pass the floor to her, and maybe you can. Dear participants, hello. I'm very happy to be here and discuss the problems and issues on such a level. Please, can you put my presentation on? Yeah, maybe we can bring it to the screen. Okay. Okay, without any doubt, we can say that the problems of ecosystems became the main issues of the century 21, and we should understand that the healthy and very effective functioning of people depends very much on sustainable and effective functioning of the ecosystems. What we saw in 2016 in the report is that we have unsatisfactory level of pollution of air, water and other resources, and also we can see that gas emissions are over high. The volume of the extracting industry in the economy of Kazakhstan shows that we need to pay more attention to this issue. We can see that the emission of CO2 is very high, and last years of such problem have led to the situation that we have now, which can be a risk to the economical development. We can see here that the development of the economic growth depends very much on the sustainability of ecosystems. As you know, the head, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, have given an order to improve the ecological situation, and also he confirmed on long-term plans on using natural resources, especially on biodiversity. Also, the order was given on restricting the fees on the violation of the existing eco codes. In January of the current year, we have a new update version of the ecological code, and we're in the beginning of the new approach towards using the ecological systems and resources, which is the ecosystem approach, which is based on the improvement of ecological situation, as a result of which we are hoping to eliminate the other consequences. We can also see that we have a sustainability of economy if we start to use this new approach. Annually, the Center of the Ecological Development, Yale University, usually measures the index of result. 180 countries participate in this report. We're on 76th place. Further, the CIS countries, we can see Belarus Republic on 48th place with this index, when on the state level the transmission to the green ecology is happening. And we can see here that our Eurasian Union partners are also using the green approach. As a result, on the example of Belarus Republic, to use as a fuel torfus, there was an assessment done, and the evaluation came to $84.8 million. Ecosystems play a very important role in the life of people, not only fuel, but also the food products, and also they regulate the environment in order to provide for the safety of population, the growth of cities, and then the transformation of natural landscapes create serious problems connected to losing biodiversity and other. And also under threat is the long-term aim, sustainability of the citizens of the cities. That is why the city construction is under very much criticism connected to the destruction and destroyance of biodiversity and ecosystems. So we had a big discussion when not only ecologists and population, they have participated in the discussion of Kokzheiliao issue, and now we still have debates on the hotel built in Basjira location. So this all is very much very much of an issue. Very important factors depending on the ecosystem is the farm industry. We can see a very big ecological and economic loss for the soil as the main resource for the agricultural functioning.
And the next slide, the same time, we're in the conclusions. At the same time, there are plenty of examples of rational, effective city development and ensuring quality of life and safety of citizens in other countries. And an objective assessment of ecosystem services will enable us to get a bigger picture of the cost and benefit analysis to determine the best strategies. And international experts have come together in the opinion that investments in natural capital of today bring the biggest return on investment, and that has defined the principles of financing projects of international financial institutions and funds that support environmental initiatives. Next slide. With the adoption of the new version of the Eco Codex, we need to further work on our regulatory framework to determine the principles of the environmental approach to industry and program documents in the sphere of developing fishing, agricultural industries, city planning, and industrial planning. And we need to improve or continue to improve the existing mechanisms of assessment of environmental impact, as well as to focus on the economic component of environmental management and ecosystem services. And because of the above, we need to study international experience and shape the following offers. First of all, the law enforcement in terms of the environmental approach in all the industries of the economy, do an integration of the economic value of ecosystem services into practice, and secondly, to strengthen the role of NGOs in making decisions, to adopt a comprehensive set of measures of supporting the ecosystem approach when doing agriculture and developing tourism, and to shift to an eco-economic system of reporting, which is supported by Kazakhstan, including using information technology, and to continue to environmentalize all industries, agriculture, transport, energy, and most importantly, we need to focus on agriculture as the most sensitive to negative factors of changes to the environment. Thank you very much. Thank you, Aijan. If you allow me, I have one question for you. We have a little bit of time left until our next speaker. Now we know by experience of other countries that for specific ecosystems there are special laws. So if we're talking about natural capital, it has to be something specific, a specific site or a local approach is what's needed. So do you think we need special laws to protect ecosystems, specific ones? And will that see any development, this type of regulation change? Like in the news we had lately about the law of the Yangtze River in China, a law that was being developed for 5 years, and now they have specific measures in their regulation about that. Do we have similar cases in Kazakhstan where we need to create special laws for a certain major idea? Like at the Nazarbayev University, they had a concept on on creating a social partnership. Do you think this will be something that will develop? I think we're right now at the stage when we are able to, due to the new version of the environmental codex, to analyze everything and to see how we can best practically implement that in our country, because there is experience of other countries. There are best practice examples, but I think that for us, we still need to be careful and prudent about our specifics of our region. I mean, all is possible. We do know that the environmental code has not yet been implemented, and it lists requirements and responsibilities for business in terms of the environment. So we'll probably be developing these rules together in working groups at separate meetings. Thank you very much, Aijan, for your support. We have another 4 minutes before our next speaker's online presentation. I don't know if they're ready. We can ask them. Oh, Michael is here. So I guess to our partners, is the sound working?
Good afternoon. Партнером нашей сессии на самом деле
The partners of our session are the ones who supported this idea is actually PricewaterhouseCoopers and their department for the Eurasian region, and Kazakhstan. Among our speakers today is a practitioner, a leader, public sector leader, partner of PwC Eurasia, Michael Ahern. You can see him on the screen right now. And joining in later is Akbota Askanbay, the Director for Corporate Governance Practice, PwC Kazakhstan. Michael, thank you very much for your support, for your collaboration. I'd like to pass the floor to you. Thank you very much.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. And can I just clarify, I'm being heard clearly?
слышно.
We can hear you really well. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. My name is Micah Hearn. I'm a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers. I'm going to chat for the next 5 to 10 minutes around the topic of sustainability through the lens, from the perspective of the corporate sector, and then for the second half of this presentation, focusing a bit more on corporate governance. My colleague Akbota is going to carry on. If we could move to the next slide, please. So this is just, if we just go back one, please, for a moment. Okay, so just broadly, we're going to have four sections to the topic. I'm going to present a framework for thinking about ESG, so how corporates think about ESG. Then I'm going to try to give a practical example, and the one that is closest to home for me in terms of a net zero commitment is what PwC is doing. So I'll talk about that. And then Botta is going to pick up the third and fourth topics. So ESG and boards, and finally, just from a reporting and assurance perspective. So thank you. If we could go to the next slide. Okay, so as I said, the first topic is trying to place ESG in the context of how corporates are thinking about it. If we turn now to the next slide, please. So I've got two slides, this one and the next one, which are around just giving a little bit of context to what we're saying. Essentially, ESG is being driven at two levels. So companies themselves really are starting to drive ESG sustainability themselves now in a way that probably they weren't doing 5 years ago and has really picked up, I'd say, over the last 18 months. If you're looking at this slide, there's a very key statement, and this is actually taken from the international group BASF, who are involved in the chemical industries. The statement said, the focus is now integrating ESG into daily business. And I'd encourage you just to to bear that in mind, and it'll come through sort of during the course of the discussion, that ESG is not this topic hanging out on the side when companies are going about their business. It's very, very much integrated into business. This slide is interesting because, sorry, yeah, thank you, just stay with it. You can actually see, thank you, stay with BASF. You can see how the topic has actually evolved. Where it began was very much a sort of safety type of topic, and it's moved through various stages to the extent now where we're looking at, you know, major issues, which is the issue of climate. If you look at the bottom of the slide, it's also very instructive. You can see, so the word motivation is what I'm looking at, and the words that are then on the right of that. You can see there what are the drivers behind this evolution of the ESG topic. So it starts with regulatory compliance. We've heard already mention about Kazakhstan, the new environmental code. So the regulatory environment is crucial, but then there are also other drivers. For example, cost. What we see now is that some of the cost issues which were impediments in the past, for example, the cost of solar panels is dropping significantly. So there are other drivers coming into play. And I'd also mention the last one there, the value to society. And if we now just move to the next slide, and again, I'm still staying with just the overall context. The point I'm making here is to differentiate between shareholders and stakeholders. So when we think about costs to society, we're actually thinking of the stakeholder more than just the shareholder community. And what we're seeing now is that investors, financial investors, but wider investors in the business, you know, be that employees, be that suppliers, be that customers, are looking at business from, sorry, I'm getting an echo, are looking at business through a sustainability lens. Sorry, I'm just, okay, sorry, hopefully that stops the echo. Yeah, so staying with the idea of the investors. So if you look at the second last and the last bullet, you can see shareholders are requiring increasing disclosure by companies. So this brings in the topic, whereas historically we've just had financial disclosure from companies, we're now hearing a lot about non-financial disclosures. It's a key topic. But really importantly is that we're also starting to see that the key performance indicators, the KPIs of executives are requiring sustainability metrics built into them. And that's really a key driver of the change that's happening in business. So having sort of just given that overall perspective, thinking about the investors, thinking about how the corporates are driving it themselves, if we could turn to the next slide. Okay, this slide is essentially just trying to fill out what we're talking about when we talk about ESG. So trying to have some consistent terminology. So E is obviously environmental, S is the social, G is the governance. I'm not going to sort of talk to every bullet which you see under those headings. But what really is important is thinking about those three verticals, E, S, and G. If we look at the right-hand slide, the right-hand side of the slide and the bullets there. So I've just raised a couple of points which are very relevant in terms of the energy sector, the mining sector, the resources sectors. So the first one is saying there is both a threat and an opportunity for business. Quite often, when people are thinking about sustainability, you think about a Shell or a BP, it's seen as a very big threat to their business. But at the same time, and possibly more importantly, there's an enormous opportunity for all businesses to reshape what they're doing, go into different markets, etc. So really important is to think about ESG both as an opportunity as well as a threat. On the social level, so I've referred already to the topic of stakeholders rather than shareholders, but we can see how important the stakeholder or the social community is. You know, just one example would be the Rio Tinto group, who recently have had quite significant problems in Australia because in connection with a new mine, they didn't take into account the impact on certain Aboriginal communities, etc. So business has to take account of its stakeholder community. And then the third vertical is that of governance. And if I was to make one comment here, it would be to raise the issue of reputation. Whatever business you're in, and I'd mention my own business, PwC here, really we're as good as our reputation is. And if our governance is not strong, we're going to have problems in the future. All businesses are as strong as their weakest link. Governance is a hugely important topic. If we could then turn to the next slide, please. Okay, so the previous slide was, if I'm trying to sort of look at your mind's eye, the previous slide was talking about vertical structures, environmental, social, and governance. This slide is about horizontal. So think of a matrix, and there are 4 horizontals. And this slide is intended to help understand how businesses are thinking about sustainability. So for any business which is thinking about sustainability for the first time, if you look at the top left part of the slide, it refers to climate risk and impact baselining. So that is essentially saying we need to do some sort of study about where the business is today, some sort of diagnosis. Is the business advanced in terms of how it's thinking about ESG issues? Is it a bit of a laggard? It hasn't thought about the topic already. But you've got to start from some sort of study, a holistic study about where you stand in terms of ESG. So that's the climate risk and impact baselining. Having done that, you know where you stand. Then it's a matter of turning to your strategy. So again, we've just sort of moved round the clock on the left-hand side, net zero strategy development. So it's important for all businesses to incorporate ESG into their strategy. This comes back to the point I was saying previously. ESG is not this sort of topic which is an additional thought. It has to be integrated into your overall business strategy. And that means being dealt with at a board level. If we come round the clock now to between sort of 15 minutes past and 30 minutes past the hour, we then talk about the organizational transformation. Essentially, that box is saying that ESG has to be incorporated into all the processes that happen within the business. So for example, if you're thinking about your purchases, your procurement cycle, you've got to consider who you're buying from an environmental perspective. Is your supplier environmentally friendly? Is it social, i.e., is it employing good labor practices? Governance, is it an ethical supplier? That's just one example, but all the other cycles in the business, thinking of your staff cycles, your sales cycles, have to incorporate the organizational transformation dimension. And then lastly, the fourth element here, so from sort of half past the hour till quarter to the next hour, is around the transparency and reporting. And this ties in with what we mentioned earlier around non-financial reporting. Businesses now have to do both financial and non-financial reporting, and that non-financial reporting has to be conducted with the same seriousness as the financial reporting, should be subject to audit, should be subject to full disclosure. If we move to the next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this slide. This is basically depicting the same information as I've just been talking about, but in a slightly different visual. So you've got strategy at the top, you've got the transformation in the middle, so the implementation, and at the bottom of that V shape, you've got the reporting. So it's really just saying the same thing with a slightly different structure. So what I've done up until now is just try to give you a little bit of a feel as to how business is thinking about ESG, the three topics being verticals, and then the horizontals: do your diagnostic, think about your strategy, think about your operations, think about your reporting. If we move then to the next slide, I'm just going to try to make what I've just been saying come alive a little bit by talking about what PwC is doing in terms of net zero. And again, if we could just quickly move to the following slide, please. So what you can see there in the middle is there's a statement that says in 2020, PwC announced our worldwide commitment to net zero by 2030. So we as a business have made a net zero commitment, which we need to achieve by 2030. On the following slide, if we could turn to that, we actually just describe how we're going to get there. So how we're going to decarbonize our operation. And I'll just walk you around the slide. And again, this is going to be more of an anti-clockwise. So we're going to start with, so PwC produces an annual report, but what we've done typically is really focus on the financial reporting. So for all what we call member firms in PwC, so globally, all those firms as of 2021 are going to have to give non-financial reporting as well as financial reporting. And you can see there in the second box, it says breakdown of travel, etc. If we move to point number 2 here, so basically we need to reduce our emissions by half over the next 10 years. In fact, 83% of the emissions which PwC is accountable for actually come from business travel and air travel specifically. So our major challenge is going to be around reducing emissions from business travel. And you can see in the slide there that there's going to be less travel, different forms of travel. We've already seen it in 2020, where obviously it was impossible to travel in many cases. We came to the realization that we don't need to travel as much as we've done historically. So a big focus on traveling for business. The other area where PwC it has a lot of emissions is simply our accommodation. So basically, we're going to need to be focusing on, where our offices, the energy we use, making sure that they're energy efficient offices. So there'll be a big reduction in that area. Probably we'll also have a reduction in floor space. Point number 3 is looking at our value chain. So essentially, we're going to need to be looking at particularly our suppliers, who we do business with, to make sure that they operate in a sustainability friendly manner. And then obviously there's always going to be some degree of residual emissions left over at the end. And what we're going to have to do is then at that stage invest in certain carbon removal projects in order to deal with that tail. The last slide in my section is just, if we could move to the last slide. Is there one more? Yeah, thank you. So this is just a little bit of information on what PwC achieved under those 4 topics in 2020. I'm not going to go through them one by one, but I'll just look at the scope 3, so it's halfway down. So you can actually see that in terms of the air travel, and I said air travel was 83% of our emissions, you can actually see a very significant reduction in 2020, i.e. 29%. However, that a lot of that was attributable to COVID and our inability to travel. But you can see there that we are starting to measure exactly what we're achieving. I hope that's useful to you, just in terms of a bit of information on how to think about ESG from a corporate perspective, what an organization like PwC is doing. And at this point, Botter, if it's okay with you, I'm actually going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Mike. I'll switch to the Russian version quickly for the sake of this presentation. Добрый день, меня зовут Акбата.
Hello, my name is Akbata Iskanbay. I'm the director of the governance of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and it is very nice that the corporate governance and the ecological issues are raised more and more. If we talk about the system of corporate governance, we have 5 zones, 5 blocks. Now it is called ESG. Before it was corporate responsibility, and then it was sustainable development, what we have used so much as a term just several years ago. But as Mike has explained, the more broad term now is ESG. It is much broader. The corporate governance is now only the 3rd letter of the system. And so if we talk about the issues of ecology, they become more and more important. As a practitioner in the corporate governance, I will start with it. What should be changed in the processes and how, so that we could positively influence the process. Here I can say that in corporate governance, the flagman is the board of directors. We very often hear everything comes from above. That of course the annual decisions that the board of directors is taking annually, we can see that just under the half of directors say that ESG issues are regularly a part of the board's agenda, up from just 34% in 2019. And we can see that 41% of directors are also much more likely to say that disclosing companies' effort is very important. I very much hope that we as a country will join this trend and will join these numbers. This is a small note from me. In our study, we could note that the mostly female directors are likely to see the link between ESG and a strategy. That's actually the separate topic on the gender balance in companies, which is also the issue of ESG. On the next slide, I wanted to show you statistics. We have done such benchmark analysis for our clients. We recommended to create board committees on sustainability matters. I would like here to make a journey through this. Some oil and gas and extracting companies, they extend their field for sustainable development. We can see very nice examples here when such board committees would consider the issues. We can see here the climate change issues, management of waste. Also, the committees confirm that they meet the personnel, the stakeholders, and they look at the projects on sustainable development. So the board of directors become more active in that matter. So if among us we have participants of the board of directors, which kind of questions can be asked as per ESG strategy? We try to divide here, to separate for full board and as per committees. For the full board, we can say that the board of directors should ask if ESG issues are integrated into the company's long-term strategy, and how is the company measuring and monitoring its progress against milestones and goals set as a part of a strategy. Do ESG messaging and activities align with the company's purpose and stakeholder interests? If we talk about audit committee, then they should look at the disclosure issues, especially non-financial values. We talk here about transparency, audit of non-financial values. And of course, the audit committee should be interested in processes and controls, so how they are in place to ensure ESG disclosures are accurate, comparable, and consistent. And the last committee we haven't yet mentioned, nomination and remuneration committee. The first question to be asked, are the ESG, of course, goals and milestones effectively integrated into executive compensation plans? Are there right people with the relevant skills and proficiency? Does the company have a culture which embraces ESG efforts? So the strategy should always integrate ESG, and there should be some metrics for ESG to show the value and how it is put into the remuneration strategy. This is the question that the board of directors should consider. As per ESG and its efficiency, I think we have covered it. I wanted to bring some examples from extracting companies, mining, metal companies. We can see very nice examples here that many companies bring in their desire to reduce the emissions, more for mining, to use the renewable resources of energy. This is audit committee to take decision board how the statements are right, and that the strategy of the company, the mission of the company, it really integrates. So now we have such term as greenwashing, when such kind of statements are made, but they are not anyhow relevant with the activity of the company. This trend is a bit concerning, and it is very important to foresee that everything goes through. And the last section of our presentation, that's preparation of reporting. Here, the link between something we were saying in the very beginning, big interest on the investor side, are the rating agencies. Now we have specialized ESG rating companies. When they bring an ESG rating to the company, they are on international platforms, or those companies that want to receive international investing support, they need to receive such ESG rating. So of course you need to have a sustainability report in place, which would be good enough for receiving ESG rating. Here I would like to talk about some small details. For the present moment, we have several, we can say a lot of standards for preparing reporting for the sustainable development, for non-financial reports. Here I tried to bring the most important ones, GRI standards. They are the most simple, the most popular, so to say. They're used for the annual reporting, for sustainable development reporting. This is a standard that is used to show the companies what kind of sustainability values they should show. Another standard that is very common to us, when it is shown how the company influences the ecological and environmental change. So it is not a surprise. Everybody knows that they need to show how the company business can affect. Another standard is integrated reporting framework. We are used to that we have both financial and non-financial information reporting separately, but now we need it to be included into annual report. So one of the standards is integrated reporting standard. This is on a very early stage yet compared to GRI. This is a general guideline. So here I also would like to note that during the World Economic Forum, there was a statement made that as we have different standards, like GRI can be used differently for each company, we need a single or unified requirement on disclosure of information. Something that we see for the international financial reporting standard. So IFRSA Foundation has been suggesting to have the same for non-financial information, and now this issue is considered, so maybe we need a chamber for development of reporting on non-financial issues. So for the world arena, we can see that this interest increases more and more. And of course, it is nice to write nice reports, but here we also talk about transparency. We should consider how much this information is true. And the investors, they come to the point, they are interested to invest into green economy, into business that is sustainable for our planet. And sometimes we even see the moment of reassessment of such investment. Because of such demand on the behalf of investors, such decisions are made on non-financial indicators. So we talk about how true is the information. And thus the audit committee should also think about. This is the last slide, I think, that we wanted to discuss with you. Do you have any questions to me or Mike? Please let us know. Mike, do you hear the translation?
Botar
Thank you very much, Michael and Akbota. Really interesting materials, and your company, and generally the Big Four has always been one step ahead in terms of supporting business and changes and how business should react to the changes. Some pretty useful information for us, I think, for the audience as well. And I think they'll ask the questions online or we'll get back to you. But I do hope that you probably are going even one more step ahead in terms of what Mike is going to be doing. He's going to be rendering support to not only business but also to the public sector, and most importantly to society. So the question is, how will this social sector be incorporated in decision making with companies? I see it like that. So thank you very much. Since we're falling a little bit behind our agenda, we'll postpone questions. So let me move on to our next topic. Pretty important for our event today, because we've already talked about what regulation instruments there are, how Kazakhstan is developing that in terms of ecosystem approach. We heard about the reform of corporate management for sustainable markets. And both approaches actually include a focus on social objectives, so those that will lead to an improvement of quality of life for people. But in spite of that, various stakeholders having the same end goal in mind are not able to reach an agreement on how to achieve those goals, on the methods of how to do that. So if anybody knows how to show us how that works in real life, is Bulat Yusek, and who I want to invite right now to speak. He's an expert on sustainable development and green ecology. He's a member of the Global Water Partnership of Central Asia and Caucasus. He's been doing this for many years, I think more than 20 years now, and I just want to pass him the floor. It's a lot of information to share, but I hope we are able to stick to our time schedule. Thank you very much. Good day, colleagues. I'm thankful to Gulsara for this invitation and the opportunity to tell you about this important and interesting topic, because preserving ecosystems and social partnership, I think those two subjects are key nowadays. It's not only my opinion. If you look at the reports of the World Economic Forum and other important organizations, I have 60 slides and not a lot of time, so I'll speak quickly. And on my next slide is my work experience. Now it's not clicking. Okay. So what I wanted to really say is that my whole professional life has been devoted to this subject, and my main conclusion is that nothing is changing, and even more, it's getting worse. So we're seeing that generally across the planet by our indicators. We're seeing that where we live, throughout the years of our country's independence, we've only had a growing number of emissions and degraded land. Cities are getting polluted. We're in Almaty right now, and pollution is not decreasing in spite of the copious programs and the budget and enforcement from the ministry. So something is wrong, and what exactly? That's kind of my main point in what can really be done for things to change. Now, I've spent more than 14 or 15 years representing Kazakhstan in the UN for sustainable development, and we've prepared various reports on how Kazakhstan and Central Asia are adhering to standards of sustainable development, and we've written instructions and recipes with experts together. We've presented this at the Rio Plus 20 summit, where the head of the delegation unfortunately had to leave, and I was entrusted with conveying the recommendations. We talked about the Green Bridge, which we believe would be able to help the government, which didn't have the capacity to solve these problems. And there are my personal formulations, the summit resolutions, the Johannesburg summit and the Rio Plus 20. And we hope those would work, but it seems like they're not working. And let me tell you about the importance and value of ecosystems. Now, here's a picture of fishermen fishing for sturgeon in the Aral Sea before the disaster. Now, ecosystems, of course, are still talked about in UN reports, and they have a surface approach. They talk about how much wood, how much berries are gathered. It's not about just wood and fish ecosystems, okay? So to talk about the real cost of ecosystems, which the main function of which is to support biological life on Earth, and the parameters that we live in is actually just pressure, temperature, humidity, humidity exchange, the fruitfulness of soil. That's not done by humans, that's done by ecosystems, and we don't notice that. It's just like a healthy person doesn't notice that they're breathing air. But all of that is degrading, and humanity has been talking about this topic for more than 20 years now. Now, this slide, it's not the last slide, also pretty important. This shows that humanity has already overstepped its boundaries that are acceptable today on Earth for ecosystems to be sustainable in maintaining life and productively just sustaining life on Earth. This shows really well that we've already overstepped this even more, especially with the climate, but the biggest violation was against biodiversity, and this includes ecosystem services. And in the report of the World Economic Forum of last year, over 1 million kinds of animals and plants are endangered. Not even ancient ones, but current ones are endangered. And how do we feel about that? How do you see this? Over 1 million species are endangered. I don't think we see it at all. In no way. We don't perceive that in no way at all. Neither business, nor regular people, nor environmental specialists, the government. We don't really care about that. And so the question is, why don't we notice what's there to support our life? Why don't we value it, and why do we trample it into the ground? Now, I call this a problem of alienation. We don't feel the problems not so much of climate change or biodiversity. We don't feel the problems of the Balkhash Basin degradation, which all of Almaty depends on, and other 4 regions. We don't take them personally. Like, this is something abstract for us. Somebody's probably doing that. And does the Minister of Water Resources feel that the Balkhash region is dying? I don't think he does. And, what's the problem? And why is this happening? So the forecast of growth thresholds in 1972, it's actually coming to life. It says here that, look, all of the forecasts that were written 50 years ago are actually happening pretty accurately, because the peak of manufacturing consumption comes first, and then there's destruction. And the destruction has to do with that our natural ecosystems were disrupting the foundation of how it works. And I wrote it in the report. It's like a high-story building. There's like rich people living on some floors, poor people. But when the foundation crumbles, and the foundation in our case is nature, then we should just forget about everything poor or rich or health or employment, housing. We should be focusing on those issues, the foundation, and it has to do with every person. How do we make it so that everybody cares about that? NGOs, business, just regular people. It's not just about reporting, because they talk about progress and ecology and sustainability. We are really headed fast towards disaster. And we can see with climate change that this is on the global agenda, but I mean, it's clear that it's our fault. See the dams here that were built in the RLC basin? 30 dams. People were building this zealously, and they believed that we're helping nature and that everything will be fine. But some experts actually say that the cotton that was grown in the RLC was grown because cotton is an expensive product, and the rice, this was for Vietnam because it was a war and they couldn't feed themselves. But still, we've created a whole lot of dams. We took away the water, and now we're living with this disaster at the RLC. And this is last year's picture. Toxic dust storms have covered Tashkent and Ashgabat like snow. They covered buildings, streets, cars, and that's not the only manifestation, because the ground is degraded, it's infected, and of course their mortality is growing, especially in the Aral Basin. We got a new dust which is called the Aralcombe now. It's a huge desert, which is right now like an ulcer. It's like a cancer cell. And at the meeting of the regional center, Chingiz Aitmatov, when he was listening to the report of Mr. Babayev, a Soviet academic, and he talked about desertification, and he said, does that not have to do with the word deserter like in the army? And actually, this means that the land has been deserted. A deserter is somebody who left the field of battle, and we're creating these deserts on our planet, which just life ceases on, not just the environmental activity ceases on, but also economic. Just life ceases there, and this is what ecosystems mean for the economy and for health and for employment. Now, how can we argue about what's more important, economy or ecology? Here are the indicators of how we were taking water from the RLC, and this is exactly to which extent the lake is no longer there. And it's a new problem we have now, a disastrously fast reducing glaciers, which influence the water flows. This is also from a report, and there's a lot of research on that topic. Where should I point it so that it clicks? Now, glaciers in Central Asia, and this is the report of the Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, how we're losing water resources fast in Central Asia. And there's a line that means that we're at the threshold, we're almost there at the conflict for water. And this is the report of the Ministry of Agriculture, a forecast for water supplies. Now, water for Central Asia and Kazakhstan is actually the main factor which maintains the ecology and the economy and nature, natural sites. Kazakhstan, central Kazakhstan being landlocked and having landlocked ecosystems and an arid climate, water is actually a key factor for development, and water already currently is actually more precious than gold and oil for Central Asian countries, and is being reduced. And this is the McKinsey report. It also says that by 2030, only half of water demand will be met in Kazakhstan. What that means is that the industry, the manufacturing industry, and natural sites will be endangered. And there are also assessments of how this will impact our bordering states, Russia and China, and will also be reduced 30% by 2030. And plus that water that we're using very irrationally. And there on top is how you see how we use water in Central Asia. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but just how we use the water. How we don't use it sparingly at all. And red is Kazakhstan there. It's showing that we're one of the countries where efficiency of water management is at the lowest. It's 651 degree. It's at the one of the lowest. And I'm talking about the Balkhash Basin to show that we still have a chance for this big territory to save it. It's actually, by its size, it's bigger than the UK, Denmark, Switzerland, all together. Now, the ecosystem is pretty large, and multiple assessments show that it's endangered, similar to that of the Aral Sea. Considering that the actual lake feeds more than 50,000 lakes, small lakes, and rivers. It encompasses 12 types of natural ecosystems, from glaciers to deserts, and of course, a huge amount of biodiversity. But in that same ecosystem are problematic spots like the city of Almaty, and I've talked about that many times. I was head of department of the environment here at ecology, and I know the problems really well. We still don't have clear objectives for Almaty. We have an objective of reducing emissions, and we come up with laws, but have you ever seen an objective to decrease particles by 30% by next year? They don't have tasks like that. Or do they have tasks like that for the next 20 years? So how do you expect an improvement? And it's just, the situation is the same with waste, and it's the same with water and waste. For water, see, we did a report for 700 pages with advice on what needs to be changed in water management. We talked about all the tools, monitoring, funding, and standards. Now the cost of a box of matches for compared to irrigation water, one box of matches is 30 tons of water. Will they use water meters? Will they save water? Will they use it sparingly? Will investors go there if that's the impact from their investments? And that's in the Balkhash Basin. And McKinsey is saying that by 2030 there will be a deficit of 1.9 billion cubic meters in the Aral. And Balkhash, which is just much smaller than the Aral Sea, it's gonna quickly disappear. And it supports all these 50,000 lakes and rivers, and all of that will be turned into a new desert. And that was done in 2012. So it's been 10 years since that, and there were clear advice on what needs to be done, that the main objective for this basin is 341 meters, the level of Balkhash, which means a balance between inflow and evaporation. And all of the other indicators, such as using water sparingly in Kazakhstan and guaranteed water from China, it's also pretty clear and it's pretty exact. We even counted where we can save that water on changing our crops, on the river deltas. And McKinsey even counted how much that would cost each of those lines of development. And he said that we would even save money from doing that, that all of our costs would be returned, that if we switch to cereal crops from rice, it will give us an additional 400 million. I mean, so it's not even one of the most cost beneficial ones that they counted, but just a huge experience of management in the US and Europe and Japan. And Central Asia has been studying Senegal lately. And all of this says that, experience just says that we need to create basin management. We need to delegate. The Tennessee experience, which we were really excited about, That was in 1933 when they created a corporation which was delegated the whole basin to, and now it's part of the government. They don't have to pay taxes. They can work with bonds and loans. They're the owners. Of course, they changed their activity from industrial to environmental, and or the Biva Lake. We also worked on that. We were really inspired by it. It started from that the peasants cut grass there and children running around and people fishing, and then the program starts. What the ministry should do, what the city administration should do, the teachers, the households. So it's a pretty strong program from the Lake Biva, which was just a dirty puddle, and they turned it into clear water.
Or the Senegal experience when during 45 years they were managing the dumps and taking into consideration that for the basin management there should be just certain units of control, and not the ministries, not the state agencies, but those 4 regions that are in the basin. They tear apart the ministry. The ministry should base on the single unified values, which is the basin. In this, the basin management only allows to see the ecological, how can a person living in a flat know that the foundation of the house needs some restoring or renovation? He or she wouldn't know. That is why here it is so important, and the person has responsibility for his or her activity. We say that the relevant agency, here it is passed on by the Congress of USA, Congress and government regime of management. We suggest basin social corporation approach, which means that it is a social and a corporation as an investor that will have fish, organic food from Balkhash, environment. Everything will change, and the behavior of people too. If I'm financially independent and these shares go to my children, of course I won't allow anybody to bring the pollution to this region. So we should become responsible for the land we're living on. These are the actions divided between the state, the Akimats, the agriculture. The Minister of Energy told me that I know. So I'm here to give energy because I need to give energy. This is an order by the government. So the Minister of Finances on the first of our conferences in 1995, when I told him that there is an opportunity to take some co-financing, he told me, you know, the ruble in my pocket is more important than 100 rubles in your pocket. So this is the issue of involving people through shares, through this motivation, and it will change the behavior of people. And the corporation is free. It can issue some obligations, some shares, and it will be easier to use these tools than the tools that we have now. We won't wait for the negotiations to be prolonged when we, like negotiations we have on Ural, on Balkhash and other right now. That is why this is a plan that was put forward with this quantity indicators. We even talked to farm owners. How would they agree for the 14 GE per liter for this cost? But 10 years have passed. And this plan also foresees for the loss of water in Almaty. For example, very often people wash their cars with drinking water. So this is digitalization. We localized it with this map. You can see how this our Turan tiger on Balkhash. We of course need some parks. And we will need water for this, and we will need again the energy efficiency in terms of water, in terms of other resources, and we will see how much is the atom station, nuclear station needed at Balkhash. We then will see what is the overall plan, and our attitude will change because nobody will lobby any kind of decision. In 2007, we had a decree by the government. It was revolutionary. It said that the management system we have now, it cannot allow us to solve the issues of the basin. It was on the short-term basis, and we need a long-term. So in Balkhash line basin, unfortunately, it didn't work because one decree cannot only work. Now we talk about the importance of law on Balkhash, but we have a limit in time. We have lost 10 years. And on the partnership, we had a lot of reports of the World Bank, of UN, when they say that we cannot be partners, like here we have 13 or 14 billion. They say that there is huge potential, not only economic, but also social, ecological. So we need to consider these things, and we need to have such experiment. We said that the main condition for the implementation of plan is transmission for the basin, governance or basin management. So the state agency that can rule the water, the soil resources, the financial part, of course. This transmission to the basin management, it allows to bring the interest into general programs. You can see this slide we made. In the middle, we have the natural ecosystems, and you can see that in the very middle there is a person, and then we have parliament, government, local communities. That's another slide on how the social cooperation is important. It changes the behavior of people, of business, of private sector. And people go out of the framework of their flat, of their region, of the rules, and to see itself as a part of a bigger system. So very often, because our world ends at the threshold of our flats. And again, I want to emphasize the reports by UN that we are losing. We are losing the interaction between people and environment. That's what I said. We don't see ourselves responsible for this. 67% of people voted last year that going out of COVID pandemic should be in a green way. We will have, of course, this presentation put on the website. So we need to bring in this model, and it is not new in the world. We need to bring more social component to it. We need some expert advice on Balkhash legislation. We don't have time anymore. We lost 10 years. The law that was written in 2000, it should be updated, it should be amended. Again, creating the corporation, the Basin Social Corporation, working with population and business in order to involve them into reform of governance in the basin. So the ecosystem and the basin approach, they are described, and we have different tools through the ecosystem, through legislative basis. So now we are all basing it on hygienic principles, but we need it for the ecological principles. We made this assessment, 341 meters, 25 cubic meters. So it goes far and beyond. We can decrease it by 100 meters per person a day. 100 cubic meters, I'm sorry. Instead of 500 cubic meters that we have now. So this is for the water turnover, for the technical water supply. There are years of work standing behind those quite obvious numbers. We need to do this. And as a conclusion, I want to say that the water, as no other resource in Kazakhstan and Central Asia, demonstrates that its deficit can turn back the economic development of the country and the progress on sustainable goals. And we can solve this not only by the advice of the big companies and organizations like McKinsey said in their report. They were supporting us, they were looking at the numbers, and 10 years ago they were very much inspired because they know the potential. And we understand that we ourselves and our government are looking at the short term. So will the minister look at this change? I don't know. So thank you. Bolat. Thank you very much. We have received a lot of responses to your presentation, how to unify the efforts. What is the mechanism of interaction of business and state? But I would like just to note one thing. We talk about the Basin Social Corporation. I don't understand why this brings some fear. We have such experience in Kazakhstan. We have already created social corporations in the concept. This will be corporations between business and state in order to support population. We have experience. The concept brings some field for development, and the legislation allows this. Besides Balkhash, we have some other water objects, water basins, which have some business nearby, and they use their own initiative, their tools. I am so much surprised with your patience. You have been working for such a long time, and you are still talking patiently. Only 10 years after we had a detailed plan, you don't leave your efforts. I think that now, in the world, and in Kazakhstan particularly, there is this situation when the changes are possible in the short term. With this optimistic note, I would like to invite participants to discuss all of this outside the platform. You can write some questions now. I just wanted to say that we worked through together with my colleagues. This is one very experienced ecologist and a water specialist of USSR and Kazakhstan. He's a great specialist. Mr. Kishimbaev, Professor Kishimbaev, the head of the institute, he is now joining us. Thank you very much. Dear participants, in today's international session, the topic new single integrated approach to management of water resources is very relevant. When we say water resources, first of all, we need to say these water resources of Kazakhstan. In September of 2015, UN in its summit has taken a special decision on sustainable development 2016-2020 or 2030. This is about the sustainable goals. Water resources, especially for Central Asia and Kazakhstan, are the most important factor for the development of each region. In this document, it is written, sustainable development of each region of each state is the sustainable well-being. If the sustainable well-being will not be provided, any growth of economy won't happen, or keeping balance of ecological situation will not be possible. Because of this, the question is quite relevant. And when Bolat asked me that there is such a session, I became very much interested, and I want to say just a couple of words. Today we have a very acute issue in Kazakhstan on water resources, especially on deficit of water in all the river basins. There are 8 of them, and one we discussed in detail, Balkhash Basin. So deficit is in all the basins, and the irrational use of water resources, pollution of underground waters, on groundwaters. We are using out of date technologies for water use. And also the main water basins are trans-border. So we have the water relationship with other countries, which is quite an issue. And also the threat of running out of water resource, you know, because of the climate change. Because of this, we need to take such important measures to overcome this issues. Kazakhstan has quite a big natural resource, very rich natural resource. And the development and use of this resource for today is constrained because of the water deficit in the country. That is why when we say sustainable development goals, support the sustainable development and the unification of 3 main components: economic, social, and environmental. Having such a close interaction between these 3 components of sustainable development has a relevant feature as a result of the changes I have mentioned above. That is why we need to consider this issue on a daily basis. In general, the Sustainable Development Goals 2030, many projects are coordinated with the effort of Kazakhstan in the region. And I want to bring your attention on the Sustainable Development Goals. On goal number 6, water resources and the rational use of water sources. for Kazakhstan, having the limited water resource, when enhancing the resource and then extending the industrial sectors, using water resource has a fundamental importance. That is why in sustainable development of the country, water resource should have a very important role. And here I say the water resource management, and we need an integrated approach. In Bolat's presentation, in other presentations, we had this. Now we don't use the basin approach yet in water resources. So that is why the management of water resources is very important. You know that water is very important in the climate of Kazakhstan, not having the exit to the global ocean, and the ecological catastrophe of Aral and the very hard condition of Balkhash makes us think on how we can solve this problem. Because of this, strategic direction on the safety of our future is to transform to less water-consuming structures.
Which allows us to continue in this direction. And one of the most important and urgent ones is receiving a status of water management at regional and governmental level. According to the current water code of Kazakhstan of 2003, the government of Kazakhstan does not focus enough on this. That is why strategic problems of sustainable water systems and ecosystems are relevant issues of today. Thank you very much. Nurlan, for this. So then, we need to come up with more specific things. We need to look at this at basin level, because there's the Balkhash Basin. Let's invite the regional city administration of Almaty there, and certain ministries and departments. I even suggested to do a special forum for Balkhash, not just with the city administration, but with the international partners. We need to get the Almaty region specifically, because they set these tariffs. Yes, thank you very much, Nurlan. Thank you so much for your opinion. It's so valuable to us. And I think that the people that know you, they know how much you still have to say that you didn't have time to. Now, we're heading over to our second part. Let's do a 30-second break. Look at this video.
Мы включили этот сюжет.
So we ran this video just to show you how people try. You know, Bolat has been trying for many years to attract attention to maintaining nature, preserving it, and the ballerina did it in the way that she could. But it's actually not time to attract attention anymore. It's time for specific action. So our next session, will be on success stories, actually, on how people have been tackling preservation of ecosystems. Today we have two speakers from USAID. I will speak to Ruby in English because She doesn't have translation right now.
Hopefully you're still online. Sorry for the delay.
Yeah, hi. Yes, I am.
And I would
Yeah.
like to pass the word to you, and maybe you will present yourself, the topic and everything, not to waste our time. We are running out a little bit. Yeah, thank you so much. And then we will give a floor to Richard. Maybe you can coordinate it within the two of you.
Sure.
Okay,
I
thank
just
you
want to make
so
sure
much.
that. Do you hear me well?
We hear
Can
you very good. We see you. Yes, you can.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So yeah, thank you so much for the introduction. I'll speak briefly for 5 minutes, and I decided not to have slides, but rather speak to you about the very important topic of climate change vulnerability assessment. So USAID works with partner governments to promote resilient economies that realize their potential. And addressing the unavoidable impact of climate change is a key pillar of our economic growth and natural resources programs. Our goal is to help partner countries achieve self-reliance while pursuing clean economic growth and resilient development. So you cannot talk about economic growth without emphasizing the importance of sustainable natural resources management. However, climate change will have a significant impact on all sectors of the economy. And for us as a development agency, we support mitigating those impacts on a regional, national, and local levels, and before there's extensive damage to the natural resources and certain sectors of the economy. So preparedness and resilience are key to achieve sustainability. And climate change vulnerability assessment is the first step in resilience and preparedness. So USAID defines climate change vulnerability assessment as the analysis of the extent to which human and ecological systems are likely to be affected by climate change. The climate vulnerability assessment can identify the what, where, when, and why of vulnerability, considering the social, economic, and environmental systems upon which we all depend. So vulnerability assessments offer guidance to help reduce risk and utilize minimum resources to achieve resilience goals. Climate vulnerability is a function of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Those are the main functions that we look at as we start identifying the vulnerability of a certain sector, ecosystem, or asset to climate change. So I'll talk about each of these three elements. So first, I'll talk about exposure. Exposure is defined by the IPCC as the nature and degree to which a sector, ecosystem, or asset is exposed to significant climatic variations. So the first thing we need to identify is what are the climate stressors that will pose such risk. There are several climate stressors such as temperature change, precipitation change, and in coastal areas, there's storm surge and sea level rise. So we should have as much data as we can, and all of these climate stressors to identify the potential exposure to one of these climate stressors. So for example, we use modeling to identify changes in peak annual precipitation or changes in river flow to then identify whether the sector asset or ecosystem will be exposed to changes in temperatures or precipitations. Sometimes people assume that a certain sector or a certain asset, like a dam, would be exposed to climate change, would be exposed to severe precipitation. But after we do the analysis, we realize that the exposure is not as severe as we thought. And of course, the other way around. We think that something is away from the floodway, then it doesn't have any potential exposure. But after we collect the data and do the modeling, we realize that there's high exposure to that climate stressor. So now after we identify the exposure risk, we identify the sensitivity of the sector, asset, or ecosystem to such climate exposure. Sensitivity is defined as the extent to which a sector, asset, or ecosystem will be affected if it was exposed to a climate stressor. So each sector should have its own indicators that identify whether it has high sensitivity or low sensitivity to such climate stressor. For example, if the climate stressors we're facing are reduced precipitation and increased temperature, which will lead to drought, then crops that mature at different times of the year has lower sensitivity to those specific climate stressors. On the other hand, fruit trees that don't experience enough chill during wintertime, they get confused with higher temperatures and they do not bloom properly. So those fruit trees have higher sensitivity to increased temperature. Now, if a sector is exposed to certain climate stressors and it has a very high sensitivity to such exposure, then we look at the third element of vulnerability, which is the adaptive capacity. So first we look at the exposure, how if this is exposed, and then how sensitive it is to this exposure, and then the adaptive capacity. The adaptive capacity is defined as the ability of assets, ecosystems, and sectors to adjust to being exposed and being sensitive, and how they respond to these consequences. And at USAID, we work to increase the adaptive capacity of farmers to anticipate or respond to extreme exposure and high sensitivity to climate change. A combination of the three factors, exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity, determine how vulnerable a sector, asset, or ecosystem is. So resilience is the ability to function through shocks. And it is only effective and efficient after vulnerabilities are accurately identified. So this is why it's really important to invest in the beginning of any assessment to get the right data and to ensure that the practices that we propose are specific to the vulnerabilities. Next, those sectors such as energy, tourism, agriculture, or mining should develop a list of strategies that could reduce such risks. The key here is to translate theories into practice, and that's the hardest part. So capacity building and data transparency and availability across all sectors of the economy, especially those that are water dependent, are key to preserve vulnerable natural resources, which in turn will support a resilient and sustainable economy. That's why USAID launched our new $25 million water and vulnerable environment activity, $25 million water and vulnerable environment activity to enhance regional cooperation among Central Asian countries and Afghanistan, to enhance the resilience of the region's water resources to the impacts of climate change, and consequently the sectors that are dependent on them, such as energy and agriculture. So there's a big focus in our new water project on the energy, water, and food security nexus and the economic benefits of cooperation. So I will pass the floor now to Richard Volk, the Water and Vulnerable Environment Chief of Party, to talk about the project and about the role of the private sector in that. Thank you so much. Over to you, Richard.
Yeah, thank you, Ruby. I'm not sure I heard everything there, but I think I heard enough to know that you've introduced me and you've introduced our project a little bit here. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to just say thank you to BCSD and the organizers of this meeting this afternoon. It's been very interesting. I was very pleased to hear at the outset of the discussion the reference to non-financial reporting by the private sector, and so I thought I would just make a few points to add water to that discussion. Clearly, water scarcity and pollution also pose significant business risks, and there is a growing global awareness that that businesses are needing to establish procedures for greater transparency and public disclosure of their water usage rates and of their efforts to increase water use efficiency. I think it's fair to say that overall companies are improving on their disclosure of consumption rates, probably less so on their pollution control efforts. But I think the important point, though, is that they're not really making much headway at incorporating water consumption rates into their own financial planning and their own risk analyses of their operations. And that could pose a significant risk to their operations, to their employees, to the communities where they work, to society, as has been pointed out by Bulat and others today. So I think an important point that needs to be discussed more and more frequently is that the potential financial impacts of water risks are really, in many respects, far greater than the costs of addressing them. And I think a sequitur to that is that we need to have greater transparency before we can have transformation. And so in my view, this is so critical for the private sector to be leading on the issue of transparency, not only in this region, but around the world. Governments are usually lagging behind in their own transparency of water usage, water demand, and their planning for the various sectors. So the more that the private sector can do to lead that transformation, the better off everyone will be. So let me just, if I can, take a few minutes to tell you about. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little feedback. To tell you about the new USAID Regional Water and Vulnerable Environment Activity. This is a 5-year project that, as Ruby said, will focus on the C5+1 countries with geographical focus on the Sirdarya and the Amudarya. We have approximately 25 staff, of which half are located in Almaty. We will also have smaller project staff working in the field in each of the countries. The purpose of this activity is to strengthen technical capacity and regional cooperation. So all of our efforts will be about improving the dialogue and the cooperation, collaboration between governments towards improved stability, economic prosperity, and healthy ecosystems. So these are broad objectives, but or a broad goal, I should say, but we have 4 objectives towards that goal. And I will go through each of these in sequence, but the first relates to the human capital and the institutions that are building the next generation of water resource professionals. I want to emphasize that we're taking a WEF nexus approach, water, agriculture, water, food, energy, and environment nexus. And I'll talk a little bit about that. The second objective is related to the governance objectives of basin planning and implementation, sustaining the efforts that have been made already for small basin councils, and linking them to the larger basin governance structures that are beginning to emerge and in several countries. And the third objective is related to more of a policy level change, promoting and supporting the regional dialogue, trying to reach agreement on a shared vision and some joint initiatives that could help demonstrate the implementation of improved WEF nexus measures. And finally, we have a fourth objective, which is to address emerging environmental challenges. And I'll say a few words about that in just a moment. But first, and I don't need to go through the regional water challenges because Bulat did such a wonderful job doing that. I do want to just emphasize once again that our approach, we feel it's very important that the region starts to get a handle on the water and energy sectors and the linkages, the mutual interdependencies between these two sectors. So we're going to try to help quantify those linkages in a little bit better fashion and to bring in the concepts of uncertainty that come together with population growth and economic growth and water, food, and energy demand, and of course, climate change. And that's the other point. Ruby already mentioned climate change. We hope that we'll be able to begin to think through how to address that uncertainty rather than just put it out there as well. It's just one of those intangible world global problems that we really don't know how to begin handling. The region can do that, and we can help to build some resilience and prepare communities for the inevitable change that will happen. So I don't need to say much more about that because it's already been said today that agriculture is right at the center of that discussion in terms of its inefficient use of waters. But at the same time, the energy sector is often running and doing, you know, its own thing about planning for expanded energy output and selling that output to other countries outside of the region. And you just get a sense that there's not a whole lot of clear thinking about the availability of water that is going to be needed to sustain those development objectives and projections, not just, and we're not talking 20 or 30 years, we really need to be thinking 50, 60 years at least, because those infrastructure investments will have a life, an economic life for at least that long. So our first objective, as I said, is about building human capital. We will build upon the efforts that other governments and donors alike have done to try to build the university institutions in the region to prepare graduate level curricula and faculties that can remain and remain cutting edge, but also preparing continually changing for the uncertain future that we face. And so there are constantly some new tools and new ways of thinking that need to be incorporated into those institutions. We're going to focus on much of our effort on training the government entities that are the government officials that are involved in water resources, but not just water. Obviously, we need to be thinking about ag, energy, environment, foreign affairs, and importantly, the ministries of economy or finance in the region. We want to share all of that knowledge in information and get some healthy dialogue going through a community of practice. So that will be another objective. Secondly, I mentioned governance and building upon the work of the Basin Council efforts, but in order to support that, we also feel we need to have a better idea about the current pathway of development that exists, the relationships that exist in the transboundary sense between water and energy. And so we are going to partner with our main partner, Stockholm Environment Institute, to develop an integrated systems model, which will show the relationships between water and energy, and we can answer hopefully some future scenario questions that the governments would like to address once the model is built. We will accompany the model with facilitating a decision support process that will do just what I said, to discuss the issues, the alternative pathways for development, and really try to forge a shared vision for the future. And we also have a small grants program, and we hope that we can implement some technically innovative activities related to addressing the WEF Nexus issues. Our third objective is related to the higher order, I guess, water policy and legal and regulatory and even institutional frameworks at the transboundary scale. So here we will be taking a look at what has happened in the past 2-3 decades with respect to the transboundary water agreements, what has caused them to be either not as successful as they might have been, and the reasons why. But we'd also like to make some recommendations for what would be the next logical step for moving towards some transboundary agreements. That may have to happen at the bilateral scale at first, or trilateral scale, but this is what we would like to do, is to try to map out where the region might go. Clearly, we need to collaborate with not only the energy, but the agriculture programs, And we are in a process of consulting with all of the other donors, and soon we will be going to the national governments to do the same thing. Finally, our fourth objective I mentioned is addressing emerging environmental issues. For this, we are undertaking in this first year an assessment of the RLC, the dry portion of the RLC, to see if we can identify some viable options for an environmental remediation activity there next year. If we can, and if USAID can come up with additional funding, as they are trying to do right now, we hope to implement a modest but hopefully demonstration effect of an environmental remediation activity there. Whether that's afforestation or some other kind of ground cropping or soil stabilization and improvement, we don't know yet, because we are just really beginning our thoughts about this. But we do hope to continue in that vein and address other environmental issues around the region during the life of our project. So just in conclusion, this is my last slide. I wanted to just say that, you know, our hopes at the end of this 5-year activity is that we can bring concepts of a risk-based approach to the water, energy, food nexus issues, bringing climate vulnerability concepts and uncertainty concepts and the tools needed to help decision-making address those uncertainties. We'd like to have some positive demonstration effects for how do you address WEF nexus issues, whether it be in water demand or energy use and efficiency, environmental issues. All of these are related. They all need to be addressed. And as I mentioned, bringing the ministries of finance and economy and clearly the private sector into the discussion to discuss the economic implications of all of the above. And finally, the importance of the basin or the governance structures. You know, these small basin councils may not seem at first glance that how can they possibly play a role in all of this? Well, they play a very important role for tens of millions of people throughout the region in the communities where they are living in the sub-basins. And so that's where community understanding of vulnerability and resilience to climate change needs to take place. That's where the real mindsets needs to happen. So we're dedicated to working with those governance structures. I believe that's it. Let me stop there, and thank you once again, everyone, for giving us this floor to tell you a little bit about our activities ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruby. Thank you, Richard. It was a very interesting input and very useful input. We already got some questions. One is from Finland, from one of NGO regarding human rights and peace. And I believe we can pass it directly to you, and then we'll publish it on our website, on the event website. Now I would like to switch to the Russian again, and I will tell a few words about your experience and about the tool, how we can access real environmental risks as it is, but not just a compliance risk, which is our common practice here in Kazakhstan. Thank you.
I would like to say that for me it is a very important moment of the presentation made by Ruby and Richard. First of all, these are two technical specialists who have been working for a long time in environmental assessment and vulnerability system, using very certain approaches how to bring in the potential for risk elimination. And Ruby has invited us for the discussion. Unfortunately, we didn't see the slides that Richard presented on the screen, but everything will be published at our homepage. Besides this, I wanted to say that there was a question from the Finnish NGO to Richard, and we will address this question and the answer, and we will publish it on our website. Now I would like to give the floor to Viktor Kovalenko, the Regional Director on the Sustainability Development in Central Asia. Viktor has been working in CIS countries for more than 20 years. His experience is connected to the environmental development and on its impact on the business sector. Now he is again talking about corporate governance. Please, Viktor, the floor is yours. Hello, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you see the slides? I hope so. Yes, we can see you and we can hear you. So the slides are taking the whole screen. Hello again. Yes, we're a little bit behind time, but I don't have very big presentation, not much material I wanted to show you. I wanted to talk about the question connected to the climate change governance and how the market mechanisms work. For example, the quota trade as a working mechanism. So the first question that I would like to talk about is that in general in the world, the key contents of the low carbon policies is in general very similar, not depending on the geography and context of the country, no matter what the economic development there is. Of course, there is a difference in each country, but the key directions are the same. For example, getting rid of using coal. So all the coal thermal power stations are aimed at not being exploited in 2030. We have it in Kazakhstan, and transmission to the electromobiles again. There is a limitation on selling the automobiles with the doing this, and we can see this moment that the share of electromobiles is growing up in many countries. Also, the cost per the emission of greenhouse gases. So you have to pay for your right to have emissions of greenhouse gases. Now it is up to $80 US per ton. This is like maybe 10, 20 years, up to 100, 200 euros in Europe. Again, transforming to green electrical energy, energy efficiency, this is all something that countries are doing. Now, what kind of challenges and opportunities can it have for Kazakhstan? First of all, so-called compliance. If you don't follow these trends, then you might not have an opportunity to provide your products if you don't have compliance of the volume of the emission. Additional costs for modernization of production, and at the same time we have, yes, to put some money into modernization. And it gives you opportunities. The demand for the new low-carbon products and services and new ways of income. So this is, again, renewable energy sources. The potential is very nice here at Kazakhstan, but the question is on how to use it. So carbon as the fuel of future, you might have some good opportunities here but in the green carbon, not blue carbon. I want to say that there are different types of production of carbon, hydrogen, and there is blue hydrogen and green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is produced from methane, and there is a greenhouse gases emission, of course. And in the green hydrogen, the level of emission is not, which is done with the electrolysis of water, and again using electricity from the renewable energy source. So here with the sun and hydro stations, solar panels, so it might become something very usable here at Kazakhstan. Maybe not a source of electricity, generation of electricity for the general network of the country, but the one for the production of green hydrogen. And with Europe and China, there will be great demand for the green hydrogen. On regulating the emission of greenhouse gases, there are some international agreements, and they're based on the voluntary contribution of the participants. First of all, this is Paris Agreement. All countries have to publicly present their contribution to the gas emission elimination. Kazakhstan has joined. It has its own responsibility, which is that the country has to eliminate their greenhouse gases emission by 2030 by not less than 80%. And taking into consideration the economy of Kazakhstan and taking into consideration the sectors of business in Kazakhstan, this is quite an ambitious goal. So the plans are actually in these contribution plans. On the slide, you can see how these plans are developed. And the aim of these documents is to be created with a bottom-up approach. You can see it taking the opportunities for decreasing the emission from all over the country and seeing the number by which you can decrease, and not when you just put some number and the country is trying to understand if it can reach such number or not. Then again, the total carbon neutrality goal, which Kazakhstan has also joined. This is a goal that can be considered for the next 9 or 10 years. But for several next decades, the carbon neutrality is the main goal. So by 2060 is the goal of our country that was announced by our president. Reaching this plan is through the mutual support of the countries, not only financial, but also other support. So more developed countries have to support less developed countries, first of all, to the countries that are vulnerable to the climate change consequences. So the developed countries have to support to mobilize some resources directly through different funds in financial terms. So the financial support is needed to mitigate the consequences, and then again for the adaptation. One way or the other to several economic sectors or types of businesses, they will have to adapt that the climate change will happen. And this all needs some budget. And here also we talk about the net zero technologies, the technologies that allow to provide for the net zero emissions and for the resources, for example, electromobiles and others. What do we mean when we talk about net zero? For example, when we reach the goal of hydrogen neutrality, what do we think? Is it, why do we have here the word net? Is that the company, if we talk about the company as PwC has been talking about net zero or their net zero goals, we have the same goals. The idea is that the company or the country is announced net zero. It plans to come to the point that if it has, by this moment of net zero, any kind of emission, it will be compensated by taking in the same emissions at another place or through trade or investment into more profitable project where you can eliminate or you can decrease more emissions for maybe project on forestation. So countries and companies try to decrease their emission and they try to bring it to zero, net zero approach. If they cannot come to absolute zero, then they have to take responsibility to give some compensation on taking in some part of the emission.
And there are two mechanisms, as emissions trading and a tax. In terms of emissions trading, there's 21 programs of that, but the main share is taken up by the European system of emission trading, the EUTS. Now, what the principle is limiting and trading. So you have a higher top threshold for each sector of the economy, and that threshold is in accordance with the national goal of limiting emissions, and that limitation is set beforehand, and it should be announced preliminarily how the reduction will be taking place of that threshold, the maximum threshold. And the threshold is not only set on industry level, but also within special setups. The equipment that actually produces these emissions. And then you have the following principles, the cap and trade. So let's say the limitation is 100 tons of CO2 equivalent. Now let's take a hypothetical enterprise that they can emit 110 tons. So their task is to either reduce by at least 10 tons their emissions to be below the cap, or to buy on the market for at an expensive price the permission to that extra 10 tons. So the system is built in such a way that at the end of the day you arrive at buying the extra 10 tons being more expensive than investing in producing less emissions. And then if somebody was able to reduce their emissions, the difference they can actually sell on the market to those who need that difference. So part of the quotas are always free and part are sold at an auction. Now carbon tax is the other system of emissions limiting. It's in more countries. Now on this graph you can see some of them and the amount, the sums of the carbon tax that are in certain countries. There's two types. A tax on the emissions themselves. It's based on the amount of produced product, and it's applied to each ton of emissions, which is within each ton of what you produce, like metal, plastic, or ballpoint pens, whatever. And the second type is the tax on services or goods during the production of which there are a substantial amount of emissions, like gasoline, diesel fuel, coal, and things like that. So it works like the more you consume of goods for the production of which emissions were produced, the more you have to pay for that. Now the logic, once again, is to make consumption of goods like that expensive and to thus incentivize to reduce emissions. So when you consume less of that stuff, then you are helping with emissions. And regulation really depends on how the funds are used that have been collected from that regulation, that carbon regulation. Now here you can see the main mechanisms in the world, so pretty much where the money is being spent that was collected. They can either go to the budget and just dissolve there, or as a tax reform, they can be reallocated. They can be spent on so-called risks of carbon leakages, so in high intensity manufacturing plants which have a high consumption of carbon, and to mitigation of climate change, energy efficiency, and so forth. So depending on where the money is used that was collected when carbon regulation measures were introduced, that predefines how effective the system will be. So those are pretty much my two last slides. And here I talk about what Kazakhstan may be expecting in terms of regulation. The first is the European carbon border adjustment mechanism. You can see the chronology of how it's planned to be implemented. So in June of this year, it should be clear which of the 4 options on this slide will be selected, and starting 1st of January 2023, the mechanism should start working. And the European Parliament has already approved the possibility of implementing that mechanism, so it's got the green light and the mechanism will be there. So what about Kazakhstan? Why are we talking about this? Pretty much the point of this mechanism is such that there will be an additional tax on imported products into the EU, and the tax will be tied to how much greenhouse gas emissions were produced during the production of those products. So the more emissions there were, and many exports to EU are pretty high in carbon. So the more the exporters have to pay, and their products will become more expensive, and they will lose profits or lose their exports, and that's why Kazakhstan matters in that. And the second thing that is coming to Kazakhstan and Kazakhstan's economy is a strengthening within Kazakhstan of regulation, of carbon regulation. First of all, it's a implementation of price for emissions and a carbon tax in Kazakhstan. So currently we do have a system of emissions trading within which all of the quotas are allocated for free in the amount in which they are needed. It's planned that the system will start to work like the European one, with certain limitations that will be reduced. The thresholds will be lowered year by year, with price for quotas higher than that threshold and the growth of that price for extra emissions year to year. It's planned that in 2021 they probably won't get around to doing that, so starting 2022 they should implement that system. So in that table on your right, there are the supposed prices per ton of emissions on each phase. And an important thing starting 2023, roughly, is the implementation of the carbon tax in many ways. Once again, the expected tax rates are in your table to the right. What this will lead to is the carbon tax will make carbon fuels more expensive, gasoline, diesel, oil, where it's used as an energy carrier in order to reduce the consumption of these resources. And it's planned that this should make it more expensive for production which uses carbon fuels in order to incentivize these enterprises to invest in reducing their carbon output. Now, here are my contacts, and I'm here until 5 o'clock, probably even later. Thank you. Thank you, Victor, for this really ample presentation. Actually, for the listeners, this is interesting because such natural capital as air, which has no boundaries, but there are compensation mechanisms that are being provided for it. And so when we talk about natural capital services and costs and how all of that should work, in the future, all of the mechanisms and the examples that have been developed in such detail will be interesting. So your contacts, of course, will make public on our website, and hoping that our discussion will continue beyond our session. We've just talked about air during this session. We've talked about water before, and we do have another aspect, which is biodiversity in the food chain. Even within greenhouse gases and water, all of that is intertwined. These are all natural phenomena. So I'll give the floor to Nurlan Ongarbayev, who is the executive manager of the Biodiversity Research and Conservation Center in Kazakhstan. Just a few minutes for you. All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, it's true that maintaining, preserving biodiversity are also as obvious economically as other elements of sustainable development. And that is why probably this element or this concept is not as developed, and in the practice of companies' activities, it's not as developed to focus on that. It's not the custom. It's picking up pace lately, but I'll just briefly go in bullet points over what I want to say. The goal of my presentation is just to show how much this is underestimated biodiversity and what risks it poses for companies and for those who affect biodiversity. Now, there are many international standards, a lot of international practices and recommendations that define the requirements to disclosure of affecting biodiversity. These are international, the Asian Development Bank, the EBRD, the GRI. There's many of these structures. So many companies follow certain standards and requirements. At least they declare that in their reports, in their integrated reports or their sustainable development reports. But we're unfortunately seeing the other side of this issue as well. Oftentimes we notice that not all companies that actually do have significant impact on biodiversity will even admit that and disclose that information duly. How that can be threatening for this company, well, I think just briefly, it's already been said in the context of just general sustainable development, like compliance, penalties, it's the discontent of partners, and a different attitude of the international community towards this company. It's less trust to reports of the company, financial and non-financial. These are reputational damages and a loss in investment attractiveness. So we hear a lot ESG, these three letters, and how important that is. And we keep hearing that this is needed, but how can this look in practice if we're to look at this not in terms of methodology or theory, right? But let's look at two simple cases, simple situations, two interesting cases. One of these has to do with Kaztransgaz. This is a former subsidiary of Kazmunaygaz. Now it's no longer part of Kazmunaygaz, and Samruk Kazanay is the direct owner of that. And a case which has to do with so-called green technology, with renewable energy sources, a wind electricity generator, because a guideline came out on nature preservation recently, where these wind stations use these dangerous elements in electrical lines, and it's not considered to it's not the custom to consider them green anymore. Now, the case is Kaztransgaz operates main energy lines of Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a big country, and these pipelines go through all of Kazakhstan. In order for them to not go rusty, they use electrical cathode protection, for which along all the main pipelines they have electricity of 6 to 10 kilovolts. Not many people know this. This is not very popular, and even ecologists of oil companies don't even always imagine that these electrical lines use very dangerous elements for large birds, like electrical devices, which are called isolators, which kill birds pretty much when a wing of a bird touches these bracket insulators or pin insulators, no matter if it's a post or anything, can be anything, and the bird can die as a result of that. And with our ecologists and zoologists from Russia and Kazakhstan, we monitor the Atyrau and Mangistau region, and it was defined that for every 10 kilometers of these 6 to 10 lines which are dangerous for the birds, there's 3 birds dying for each 10 kilometers. And statistically, half of those birds are endangered. And what do we see for the company, which has a pretty lengthy number of these lines? Well, first of all, we're seeing that the media are publishing that. The zoology community is publishing that. Recently, just until recently, nobody wanted to talk about that until there were measures taken to inform these companies. In the annual report of Kaztransgaz, there's not a single word about this problem. In the report of sustainable development of Kazmunaygaz, the national company, this has been mentioned very fragmentarily, though, because out of the 19,000 kilometers of those lines, they say that there's only 60 kilometers that are dangerous. We believe this to be in violation of, first of all, GRI standards, and second, this of course confuses the stakeholders and deceives the stakeholders, because if this information reaches investors, there might be consequences. But like this, international financial institutions seem to be okay with this. Maybe they just don't get enough information about this issue. Like we found out that the EBRD is financing Kaztransgaz. And what's interestingly enough, the goal of this financing is to develop a plan of measures on corporate governance, something like that. Although this actually contradicts the EBRD's policy. So in practice, we're seeing that there's things that need attention there. And I think this case has a huge potential of negatively impacting the company and the organizations that are financing it, which probably haven't been careful enough about probing for biodiversity protection. And the second case is the Zhanatas wind power plant. Actually, wind power plants are a great thing. It's a renewable energy source. It's environmentally clean under the condition that it's not located on routes of bird migration, and if these wind installations don't use electricity lines that are up in the air. So in terms of how these work, on the slide we have the route of migration of desert eagles, and we can see here in the center from the Karatau Ridge of mountains where this Janatas power plant is. We talked to ornithologists from Russia and Europe. They were really surprised that we have sites like that. Well, it's actually not their kind of field of competence on how to solve this issue, but they were still grieved and surprised because they said that the main population of Altai eagles, almost all of Altai eagles, they actually migrate through this Karatau region. And so how did we get this biological research finding? Why didn't they talk about this factor? We don't know that. And plus, we studied this ornithological research, and they omitted a few important parts. For instance, that they have a very beautiful bird called the black stork there as well. They didn't mention that. So we're seeing that the financing funders, the EBRD and the IIB, are contradicting the agenda that they're actually meant to drive. So how do we solve this issue? Well, first of all, of course, we need to, us as stakeholders, as an NCO, we do that. We're doing that, and we will keep doing that, addressing the financial institutes for them to focus on these issues. That's the EBRD, the Kazakhstani Development Bank, and a series of other financial institutions which fund these large major infrastructure projects. It's also pretty important to gain support from auditing organizations, including these organizations that audit certification of ISO, the 4001, the ecological one, and those companies that are here of the Big Four and other auditor companies, which are who set heightened expectations and standards to their services, and we address them also as agents of change for these. So when you're verifying reports, when you're consulting the preparation of these reports, when you're consulting the building up of processes, you can actually influence biodiversity in doing that by not signing these approvals, by not allowing them to turn a blind eye for this company at some point. I mean, it's clear that you can't do that all in one day, but still you have these methods, you know, and we hope that you can use them.
Also, rating agencies and stocks. So I think that we can share this reputation risks from those organizations that take on responsibility on audit, on other decisions that allow or not allow for the loss of biodiversity. This is all. If you have any questions, I'm ready to answer. We have a small comment from Bolat. We can take another minute. Thank you very much for your presentation. I like the name of your presentation, keeping the biodiversity as a part of natural capital. Of course, we have very low understanding of biodiversity on all levels. Our living planet. We understand that our planet is living, and it is living because of the biodiversity. And people should change the understanding that they're in the center of everything. His or her life is a part of biosphere, and the Sustainable Development Goals is to keep the climate so that the climate is sustainable. It is not only emissions or greenhouse effect. This is biodiversity. I have talked about it. We need a campaign that will make a park resort the whole planet, and the person would just live in some separate zones. Thank you very much. Thank you, Polat. Thank you, Nurlan, for your interesting presentation. We have some participants of the conference that work in the audit of environmental condition from the International Expert Society. I think it will be a very interesting presentation from them. We have another case from business on the experience of sustainable development from Karachaganak deposit. I would like to give the floor to the representative. After 5, we will have still our event going on. You can leave the conference if you need to, and you can see these presentations. Thank you. Hello, dear colleagues. Just a second. Do we need to translate our presentation ourselves? Oh, okay. Can you see it? Yes, we can see. We can see the presentation on our screen. Hello again, dear participants. It's very nice that today in Kazakhstan we have such opportunities and we can discuss such questions that with time, with need, we come and we understand who, if not us, and why we need to think about it, not tomorrow, but yesterday. So all these issues being raised today, I liked very much. I liked that really we have a range of issues that today should be actively discussed in the agenda, not only by association or participants of the seminar, but going to the higher level, because these are issues being discussed in the whole world, and Kazakhstan cannot overcome them. So ecological vulnerability, Victor has been talking about what is waiting ahead. We need to act now to have certain proposals, look at our resources and see how, taking into consideration the conditions, how can we solve these issues? We wanted to talk today about quite a huge deposit, Karachaganak, how we want to regionally develop the directions connected to these issues being very important for the sustainable development, not only for economics, but to change our mentality, our culture, understanding of such questions, such issues. It is very nice that the shareholders of our company, the heads of our company, they support us in this. And we can take a role of the leader in our region and to talk about the ecological awareness of stakeholders, of all the shareholders in our region. And the platform that we wanted to suggest today is the continuation of those initiatives that we have. We talked about water resource, about Balkhash, but in other regions we have not less issues of not less importance that you should work on in each region. By the initiative of the Ministry of Ecology, development of the roadmaps in each region, there is a number of issues that should be solved. We should see what we can do on the behalf of business with the support of the state agencies. There is a new ecological code. There are many opportunities and challenges for us today so that we could continue our activity. One of the major companies in our region, if you allow, I have certain slides about our company. Thank you, Ruslan. Hello, dear colleagues. A bit about the Karachiganat deposit. This is a very big condensate deposit on the northwest of Kazakhstan, ruled by Shell, Chevroil, Lukoil, and other companies. We have a three-principle strategy which go together with the Sustainable Development Goals of UN. Starting 2008, our company produces a report on sustainable development, and it will be number 13 report for 2020. And the company reveals its activity in environment, society, and economics, and also our interaction with stakeholders. What about our ecological performance? We have very good indicator of gas utilization. We have reached it with a big effort. Also, we have the gas burning indicator quite low compared to the European indicators, and quite low compared to the global indicator. You can see this information on the right. I won't go into much detail. We invest a lot into the environment safety projects starting 1997, when we have signed an agreement. We have invested more than $400 million into projects that allowed to improve the environmental indicators at the deposit area. We have been talking about biodiversity, keeping biodiversity and ecosystems. So I want to emphasize that the company pays very big attention to this. We have been following AGP guidelines on biodiversity. We starting 2011, this plan is functioning. We update it. We monitor flora and fauna. We have some rare species, different types of flora and fauna which are rare. And the company has been paying great attention to these issues. So there are some social projects. The company also, in accordance with the agreement on the division of the production, annually has been providing certain sums for the development of the projects in the region. These projects are coordinated with Akimats, and then the Akimat brings in the list of the projects for the development of the infrastructure in the healthcare and education systems, taking into consideration our discussions that we had at our online platform today. So we would like to know that the criteria of the social projects should include environmental projects that would allow to improve the environmental situation in the region, and then the companies would be able to participate. And just for your information, during 2020, which projects were fulfilled in Uralsk, some social projects on construction were fulfilled, and we didn't step aside when the pandemics started. We helped with providing equipment for COVID testing. This is what Ruslan was talking in the very beginning, starting 2017. The company had such initiative put forward to conduct annually ecological forum that we called Uralsk Green Forum. And the aim of this forum was to create a platform for dialogue between state, business, and society, where we could discuss the most relevant issues. You can see the topics of the forum. We haven't conducted it in 2020. Usually we do it in the end of May or in the beginning of June, considering the day of environment protection. Yes, this is just a draft version. In 2021, this is our proposal. Something that we heard today, we can continue this dialogue on the level of our region and review such topics such as ecosystem approach in implementation of eco code. I think that we didn't talk that much about eco code today, but we could have our joint efforts on everything we have talked today and work through this program. And this is our proposal. Thank you very much. Ganesh, Ruslan, this is a very interesting proposal. We have been the participants of your first forum, and we saw that people participating are those officials that are responsible for decision making. It was very high level, and the dialogue with society, you saw how many organizations, NGOs have participated. I think it's a very nice platform. It should work further, and we are very enthusiastic to support you and your initiatives. Now, thank you very much for your presentation. We have actually finished with the agenda for today. So as a result of today's discussion, we have gathered the proposals for your further comments and for your review. Maybe you can see some new ideas. Maybe Galina will present those proposals. Thank you very much. Thank you. The company, KPO, I think that the conclusion of any expert meeting is such bridge that gives an opportunity to prolong the discussion on some other level or maybe on some other platform. And no doubt that such a proposal to continue discussion on ecosystems of separate regions of Kazakhstan is something that we would like to see in our further work. So bringing together the proposals that we have received, we have form the following steps that we would like to have during the discussion with today's participants. I would like to, first of all, show you such a map. It has been taken from the roadmap of Kazakhstan on monitoring of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. So the analysis that is done by the Ministry of Economics on integration of the Sustainable Development Goals shows, this assessment shows that very important two components are not anyhow foreseen in the state planning documents. And now we can see it's very logical why these issues arise. So this is how the picture is drawn. And maybe our discussion is quite relevant because we need to eliminate such disbalance. So our further steps look like this. We have analyzed the information on indicators, on task decision indices as per the Sustainable Development Goals. So the goal on putting the biodiversity national goal indicators, Kazakhstan hasn't included into the Sustainable Development Goals. And as business, no, if you didn't include it, then you cannot reach result. So our first proposal is to develop the mechanism of legislative regulation of management of certain ecosystems to find out such gaps and finding decisions and solutions for them. And another proposal is to discuss the basin corporation creation, because Kazakhstan is reporting on indicators of implementation of the complex management of water resources. In practice, this is from 0 to 100. This is per 2017. It's only 30 and it doesn't change much. There is no growth. This is the scope that we propose to discuss further for the further development of this element of a complex management of water resources through those mechanisms that were today proposed, especially by Bolat. And as a step, social industrial corporations, together with other business structures being involved. Another proposal to localize the ecosystems. This is a Northwest Kaspi, Jaik River, Balkhash ecosystem, Irtysh River, and others. Again, I want to look at those indicators that the Kazakhstan has to report on international level. On the dynamics of water use, our indicator is $7 per cubic liter of water, and if we compare it to US, it's $45 per cubic. This is how we use water, and we don't actually extract the financial resource that it has. So who can do it better than business to manage the resource make it at a turnover water use. I think that water is that kind of interaction between the state, structures, society, and business, when business can bring its competency, its skills, its experience.
So we suggest to continue consultations with local authorities, with the scientific community, the international development institutes, which is what we heard about in the speeches of our distinguished speakers. And the room for improvement is pretty much almost unlimited right now. We can just keep working on that. And the next step is to discuss a more active participation of business in ecosystem preservation projects. There are indicators which are called the scope of mandatory assistance. Now, in 2017 and 2018, Kazakhstan received from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development annually was getting $700,000. Now, just to compare, the scope of the memorandum, which our companies conclude on a regional level, are higher than these numbers. So, what our colleagues were talking about, if business gets an opportunity to implement these social projects with indicators in water supply, resupplying water, water purification, returning water into turnover, and every tenge that we've invested would be actually working towards Kazakhstan's achieving sustainable development goals. That is why we suggest to continue the discussion with regulative authorities, with the International Financial Center, because water projects need to be considered and business needs to look at them as a participation in green investment. Because water is the key resource for Kazakhstan. And the step number 5 is to discuss the tools of society's participation and strengthening the social potential to achieve sustainable development goals. I think today's platform has shown very vividly that society nowadays is prepared for cooperation. It has a great potential which needs to be used, and each of the players is prepared to go in with their experience, with their resources and their contribution. So we see our next steps with the agricultural industry participants, with our regulatory authorities and the social organizations, and everybody who's interested in this cooperation, in continuing this platform's work. We're always open, and our contact information is well known by everybody. And we urge you to send your suggestions to us, your offers on further cooperation, on your participation, and all the information about today, what people are asking about on YouTube and in Zoom. We'll make that public for your perusal now. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say that in terms of the final slide and suggesting to involve civil society, we actually touched upon issues of creating national capital, which is natural capital, social capital, and industrial capital. And we did mention industrial and natural capital, but I think the potential of social capital hasn't opened up yet, because people, NGOs, they have great potential, but maybe they just lack an understanding of a connection to regulatory documents, guiding documents, and programs that are being implemented on a government level. So probably this will be something for further discussion. And today we finish our meeting, and I would like to when I was coming here, just about to come here, I was nervous, and I calmed myself down with the words of one wise man who said, people have come to love words, but you cannot lose the world behind the words. So we should be loving what we have and making sure it's preserved. Thank you very much. See you.